where I'm going to go with my message today. Why? 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 You see, that's the big question we often ask when things go wrong. We asked that question back in 1986 when the space shuttle blew up. We asked that question in 2001 when the towers came down. We ask that question every day when we face the trials of life. You know, I had a funeral yesterday, and the man whose service it was, a celebration of his life, was a good man, longtime middle school teacher, well known in the community. He lived to be 82 years old, and he was content with his life. But his daughter said that she believed he questioned a lot. His faith as a child growing up in the church, his father was a soloist in the choir and sang all the great hymns, and he learned those hymns and he internalized them, and yet, as a young boy, he saw his mother suffer. She had rheumatoid arthritis, and from his earliest memories, his mother was already being crippled up, and in his young adult years, she began to have to use crutches, and she had knee braces on, and always had some level of pain, and he always wondered why. Why would God make his mom suffer like this? And then later in life, his wife developed cancer, and he began to walk with her through that journey, which was long and painful. And in the last 3 years of his life, although he still had that foundation of faith, the question remained with him. Why? Why? That's the question posed in the book of Job. Job's a good man, and yet God allows the devil to wreak havoc on him. Job loses his family, his fortune, and even his health. God says to the devil in this beginning passages, he said, you can do whatever you want to Job, and I know he'll remain strong and true, just don't kill him. Well, there are moments in Job's life where we read through the story where he almost wishes he was dead because he had boils on his skin and he suffered terribly. And he had some good friends, and his friends would come and they would talk to him and they would try to console him by giving him the textbook answers as to why people have to suffer, why he was struggling. And they say, well, Job, you must have sinned, you must have done something wrong. And Job says, no, I've always tried to live my life right. I've tried to be righteous. I've tried to follow the commands. I love God. And it just doesn't make sense. And they said, well, you must have done something wrong. Maybe you don't know, but maybe you made God mad. Maybe you said something. Maybe you did something. And you know, the truth is we can identify with that. When we're going through a hard time, we have friends who say, well, you brought it on yourself. And sometimes we do, let's be honest. We have friends who try to point out all the different reasons that sound theological to kind of give an explanation for why we're suffering. And sometimes, you know, we acquiesce, but it still doesn't resonate in our heart because we love God. We try to live faithfully. And even if we've blown it, we hear it about the grace of God. And so we say, where's that grace when we need it? But Job knows that he's tried to do right. Well, you know, it even gets so bad in his life, and he's probably been lamenting and maybe complaining a little bit, and we don't blame him. But it gets so bad that his wife says to him, Job, why don't you just curse God and die? Get it over with. Do something really bad to make God so mad he'll end it for you. I think if nothing else, the book of Job tells us that there are no easy answers. When you're sitting with someone who suffered a terrible loss, who's going through a season of devastation, there's no pat answers to give. Nothing you say is going to make them feel better. It's better just to sit with them and let them mourn. You know, the Jewish people have this wonderful tradition. It's called sitting Shiva. When someone dies, for the next 7 days, the house is open and people just come in. And many times, the most helpful people are not those who try to give all kinds of answers and make them feel good, but they're people who just sit with them. And I love that. I think sometimes in Judaism there are some real deep truths. And as someone is sitting with you in a time of trial, instead of like Job's friends trying to come up with all kinds of answers, if you just sit with a person in their misery, in their sorrow, in their heartbreak, you remind them that God is there too, in the midst of the pain and the suffering. It reminds them that they're not alone. Because I think the worst thing when you're suffering is to feel that God has abandoned you, that nobody cares. In his book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, Rabbi Harold Kushner tackles the subject. And he writes this great book, and he concludes that we live in a fallen world where bad things happen. That's his final answer. He doesn't try to make you feel better. He just says, this is the world we live in. But he believes that God is still good and just. From a Christian theological perspective, we take it a step further. We believe that even though bad things happen, we have a God who sits with us and walks with us in our pain. And the evidence is found in Calvary, where the antidote to death and suffering was found in God, who suffers life's humiliation alongside of us as he watched his innocent son face an unjust conviction and was hung on a cross to die. He was spat on. He was abused. He was ridiculed and mocked. And he had to take it. So in our deepest moment of sorrow, when we cry out like the psalmist who says, my God, why have thou forsaken me? We can know that God feels our pain. In the book of Job, after argument has been heard, Job calls on God to come and answer him. He says, God, okay, I know you're there. I know you've witnessed everything that's gone on. I need you to come here now and tell me why. You know, I remember that one night where I did something similar. You know, my dad always loved the farming, and it was a Saturday, and I was up trying to avoid helping him load hay bales on a wagon. And we were up there on this hot Saturday afternoon, and the hay was coming off the baler, and we were putting it on the wagon, and my mother came up, and she was all in tears. And my father was a hard worker, trusted God. But my mother said to him that my brother had been arrested, and they had to go down to the station, and so my father left. And I remember sitting there on that afternoon saying, God, my parents are such good people. Why is this happening? Why do they have to go through this? Talking to God, God, come, let me see. Maybe you've been there. Maybe there's been some instance in your life where you were asking, God, I believe in you. Or like the man whose son was sick said, I believe, help my unbelief. Maybe you're there saying, I just need some sign. I need something to know that what I believe is true, and that even though I'm going through this moment of crisis, this injustice, this terrible thing, that there is more to know. And so when Job calls on God to give him an answer, he says, you were always there before. Well, where are you now when I really need you? His pleas sound so much like David in Psalm 77. David says, I cried out to God for help. I cried out to God to hear me. When I was in distress, I sought the Lord. At night, I stretched out untiring hands, and I would not be comforted. I remember you, God, and I groaned. I meditated, and my spirit grew faint. You kept my eyes from closing. A long, dark, sleepless night, and some of us have been there. I remember my songs in the night. My heart meditated, and my spirit asked, will the Lord reject me forever? Will He never show His favor again? Has His unfailing love vanished forever? Has His promise failed for all time? Has God forgotten to be merciful? Has He in anger withheld His compassion? You can hear David. You can hear David wrestling with doubt, wrestling with his pain. Now, the book of Job does not tell us why God allows suffering. I think that's what the rabbi said. There's no answer in that book. Why does God allow suffering? After all Job's talking and complaining and crying out to God, we don't have God come down and say, well, I did it for your own good. Sometimes that's what our friends say. Well, God is testing you. He's going to make you stronger and better. Or God will never give you more than you can handle. Don't worry about it. No. When we hear those answers, we tell people, shut up. And I'm being blunt. Because in the midst and the sorrow of the deepest moments of our lives, we don't need to hear that. Because we already feel it. We're already experiencing that. After all of his friends philosophizing and talking theology about Job's problems, God does show up and he answers Job, but he doesn't tell him why he had to suffer. You heard what Kathy read earlier. In the moment where you expect the big reveal, if you like serials on television, these shows that come on and episode after episode, you're always waiting for the big shoe to drop, for that big moment to come. And here we go into chapter 38 of Job. God shows up after all that has gone on before, and we're ready. Okay, God's going to give us the answer. He shows up in a whirlwind. We expect big things. And then the Lord answered Job out of the storm, out of the whirlwind. He said, "Who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. Pull up your big boy panties, in other words. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you must know, because you know everything, right? You're questioning me. Tell me. Who stretched the measuring line across the creation? On what were its footing set, or who laid its cornerstone while the morning stars sang together and all the angels shout for joy?" I can almost imagine Job kind of mixed up, wondering, what's this have to do with my pain and my suffering? But it goes on, and if you read through Job, it's chapter 38 and 39 and 40 and 41 for 5 chapters. Job is questioned by God. He goes on with these questions for 4 long chapters. Have you journeyed to the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been shown to you? Have you seen the gates of the shadow of death? Have you comprehended the vast expanses of the earth? Tell me if you know all this. Will the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? Let him who accuses God answer him. In other words, do you know more than I do? I'm the one who set everything in motion. Again, it was interesting because not too long ago I was listening to an argument, and it talked about some of these arguments about creation, and one of them was that some people believe that God just created everything and then walked away and let it go for itself. And again, as I mentioned last week, sometimes people just believe that there's this big bang, that things just happened out of nowhere, and that God, if there was a God, just kind of sat off to the side and watched it all. And yet, the Scriptures remind us that from the beginning of time, from the creation, as God spoke everything into place, God did that. He did it, and He not only did it, but He continued to live and follow and be a part of all the creation. The good and the bad and the ugly. And the day when man and woman rejected God, God didn't walk away and say, "Hey, I've done it. That's it." God continued to reach out with a plan. And despite the fact that we live in a fallen world where things go crazy, God has not given up on us. We know that because when we turn the pages into the New Testament, the revelation of Jesus Christ, we see that God understands our pain so deeply that He was willing to enter into that pain. We're going to be celebrating Christmas before long. Can you believe that? How many weeks to Christmas? Some of you already got your lists out and you're shopping and getting ready. We believe that at Christmas, the miracle of Christmas is that in that baby Jesus Christ, God entered into the world. Not as a king, not as a glorious riding the horse of power and authority, but as a tiny baby so that He could live and experience life in a way that we do. The disappointment, the story of the birth was a story in terrible times. Before long, King Herod decided that the firstborn children of all the people of Hebrews will be killed. Jesus and His family had to flee to Egypt. Imagine the fear, the worry, the trepidation. That's the world that Jesus was born into. He's the Son of God. He shouldn't have to worry about that, right? He's got a halo over His head. He'll be protected. In the time of temptation, the devil says, why are you worrying about that stuff? You could jump off the highest mountain and God will send 1,000 angels, 10,000 angels to protect you. But see, that wasn't God's plan. Jesus was to live and to sweat and to breathe and to work and to bleed and understand the disappointments of betrayal. and rejection that we would feel. You see, that's the God we have, the God who has been there and experienced it, who weeps in heaven when we weep. The day that Bruce, the man whose funeral I had, when he died, I can imagine God weeping that he had to experience what he experienced in life. But God said, I've got a plan. I'm the one who put the stars in the sky and the moon there. Now, maybe it doesn't bring much consolation in the moment of trial, but it's a reminder that everything that is good, that all that we are, that God did that. The Apostle Paul talks about a spiritual battle that's taking place where the armies of God are taking on the armies of darkness. You see, that's what happened in the time of the fall, that all of a sudden there's this great battle going on, and we can't see it, but we feel the effects of it every day. If you've ever read one of Frank Peretti's books, I commend them to you, because you get the idea that while we're toiling away down here, that the armies of darkness and the armies of God are fighting it out. And there are casualties just like in any war. That's why prayer is so important. I used to get angry when there would be some tragedy and someone would minimize the power of prayer. When someone said, I'll be praying for that situation. Because I believe there is power in prayer. Coming together in times of trial is essential because we're reminded that in the midst of the people of God, there is power to change things. We need to stand together in these times of trial to support and encourage one another. Not like Job's friends, not to try to make someone feel better. You know, there was a story I heard years ago about, I think it was a Special Olympics event, and the kids were in a race, and one of the little girls fell down. I think it was in Chicken Soup for the Soul. One of the little girls fell down. And you know how competitive most of us are? We'd say, ha, 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 ha. You know what they did? Well, the children stopped. The little girl was crying. They went back, and they picked her up, and they all ran to the finish line together. I remember reading that story, and I said, that's what the Christian life is supposed to be like. Because the truth is, some of us are going to fall down, and we're going to start crying. But God brings us together in a community so that when one is hurting, all are hurting, the Apostle Paul says. And one is rejoicing, all are rejoicing. God has given us each other so that we can get through this race called life. You think back to September 11th, 2001. It was a horrible period in our most recent history. Fear and disbelief were everywhere. Everybody remembers where they were and what they were doing when they saw the towers come down. I was visiting a woman named Gwen Tomzik. I'd heard it on the radio. I stopped into Lori's store and they were listening to it on the radio. And I was at Gwen's house. And she had the TV on. And we sat there and we watched as the second tower came down. Absolute disbelief. Even on that day, people were wondering where God was. Stories emerged, though, of angels in the stairways and brave men and women who raced in to face the danger to save others. And as a nation, one of the few times that I can remember in my life, we came together and we prayed as we faced the uncertainty of the future. And there was a unity from across racial and ethnic and social barriers like I'd never seen in my life. And that was God. That was God. The truth is, as David testifies again and again, this David who is among the biggest complainers in the Bible, read through the Psalms, that when all is said and done, David says, God will be there for us. He says this in Psalm 89, I will sing of the Lord's great love forever. With my mouth I will make your faithfulness known through all generations. I will declare that your love stands firm forever, that you have established your faithfulness in heaven itself. You said, I will make a covenant with my chosen one. I have sworn to David my servant, I will establish your line forever and make your throne firm through all the generations. When he was being chased by Saul, there was doubt. But now he knows. Job echoes those words when he declares, I am unworthy, after God is finished, pointing out all the things that God did. And everything that Job knows was created by God. God did that. He created the great whale. He created the squirrel. My dog Baxter loves squirrels. I tell you, every time he sees a squirrel, he says, "Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy." Sometimes we take these things for granted. But Job, in thinking and considering what God had just said to them in the midst of his pain and suffering, says, there's so much more that I don't understand. I'm unworthy. How can I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth. I spoke once, but I have no answer. Twice, but I'll say no more. I know that you can do all things. No plan of yours can be thwarted. You asked, who is this that obscures my counsel without knowledge? Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. My ears have heard of you, but now my eyes have seen. Very often after we go through a crisis and we know that God carried us through, it's at that moment I say, I know God is real. God was there. But it's getting there that's the hard part. And I think Job reminds us of that. You see, in this episode, God reminds Job that He created everything, and there was a divine plan, and that God was there in the beginning, and He will be there to see it through. Job only saw a small portion, but that should be enough for him to trust God and to wait on Him. And hopefully, maybe that's enough for us. The psalmist says, the heavens reveal the glory of God, and when you look at a baby, when you look up in the heavens and see the stars and the moon, when you consider the changing of seasons where trees come out in living color and then die and then are resurrected again in the spring, all you need to do is say, God did that. It should remind you that God can do these things and He can do all things. That was God's message to Job. You don't need to have it all figured out. Trusting God is not about trusting Him as long as we understand and agree with Him. It's about trusting Him even when we don't understand, because we know who He is and what He's capable of. We see miracles every day, but we often miss them because our eyes are focused on other things. I wish God kept His people from experiencing pain, but there are no guarantees in this fallen world that tragedy won't touch your life. There's a song that Lori and I used to sing that says this: God has not promised skies always blue, flower-strewn pathways all our lives through. God has not promised sun without rain, joy without sorrow, peace without pain. But God has promised strength for the day, rest for the labor, light for the way, grace for the trials, help from above, unfailing kindness and undying love. We live in a beautiful area of the country. If you've ever gone down to the beach at sunrise or sunset and watched the sky, you'll have your breath taken away. On a sunrise service this past year, we stood there and we watched the sun come up. The newspaper said the sun was going to come up at 6:35 or whatever the time was. And we didn't have to guess. The sun came up exactly as planned. Just as you can be assured that the sun will come up, you can be assured that God will be there in time of trial. That's what prompted Job to declare at the end of all this, "For I know that my Redeemer lives, and He shall stand at last on the earth. For when all is said and done, when the trumpet sounds, and every tear is wiped away, we will be able to stand up with Job and say, God did that." Amen.